Many of our schools are turning to the federal government for federal money, but there's a big problem with that. The federal government is $16 trillion in debt. That is a massive amount of money. Matter of fact, the average person cannot really fathom a $16 trillion debt. The average person cannot really fathom 2 or 3 more zeros than they're used to dealing with on a regular basis. So if you're used to dealing with, $4,000, $5,000, you can probably understand 50, and you can probably understand 500,000. Once you start dealing with 50 million, it starts to look like monopoly money. And I don't mean that in a degrading way to anyone, it's just that the average person has no feel for how much money that actually is. But the education budget in Ohio is in the millions and millions and millions, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars range. I want to be the one to tell the federal government, quit borrowing on our children's behalf here in Ohio. If we could resolve the issue of school funding using local and state dollars and not federal dollars, we can quit borrowing from the federal government. Now, we're not borrowing, but when the federal government sends money to us, you have to understand they are borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that they spend. Who's going to repay that 40 cents? Well, I can tell you who's going to repay it. You are, and our children are. So our children in the K-12 schools, when they receive the federal government money, are going to end up repaying every bit of it in taxes down the road. We can't continue to spend the way we have been. The federal government is just going through money left and right, and it's going to end up bankrupting us. Eventually, the bill always comes due. Always. So since the federal government is borrowing money left and right, we've got to resolve school funding right here in Ohio. It is the state's responsibility to fund our schools properly, not the federal government's. My name is Philip Gerth. I'm running for the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education controls K-12 policy for every form of education in Ohio. Homeschool, private school, public school, charter school, parochial school. The State Board of Education determines education policy in the state of Ohio. I'm running to get on this board. Why am I running for office? I'm running to make a difference. What are the differences I really want to accomplish? I'm going to lay out 3 things that have to be fixed, and then I'm going to push for it very hard on your behalf. First of all, the school funding formula is broken in Ohio. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court of Ohio ruled 15 years ago that the school funding formula was broken and producing all the wrong kinds of results. That was the DeRolf decision. You may have heard of it. And we've now had this problem for 15 years. That's long enough for someone to have gone all the way through K-12 in a broken system. As a result, in Ohio, we now have a generation of lost potential. That's got to be fixed. So I've got some ideas for resolving the issue of school funding. Look it up on my website, or you can look up on my Facebook page, philipgerth.com, philipgerth.com, or you go to Facebook and put in Philip Gerth District 9. The second thing that we have to resolve is the issue of academic standards. Many of our K-12 graduates, when they get to college, are forced to take remedial courses in college. I don't know if you've looked at the price of college lately, but the prices are going sky high through the roof. There is no reason that our K-12 graduates should have to take classes in college that they should have received in high school. So resolving the issue of academic standards is issue number 2. Issue number 3 is restoring local control. The federal government has gotten increasingly involved in how we do school, K-12, here in Ohio. That's not really the federal government's business. The reason that we're taking the federal rules is because we're taking so much federal money. And the reason we're taking so much federal money is because we haven't resolved the issue of the school funding formula. So if we could resolve the issue of the school funding formula, we can then quit taking the federal money, we can quit taking the federal rules, and we can tell the federal government to take more of a back seat in education here in Ohio. K-12 is the domain of the states. I want to talk for a while about local control. This video may go on for a few minutes. Local control is something that is increasingly being lost in our K-12 schools. Increasingly, the federal government is calling more and more of the shots as it relates to public education in Ohio, and indeed nationwide. It's nothing like when I went to school. I'm 39 years old. The federal government was not nearly as involved as they are now in our children's education. I want to talk for a little bit about the history of states' rights. This is something that many people have forgotten historically. If we go back to 1776, the year our nation was founded, in 1776 the people rebelled against King George and the British, and they decided they would start a new form of government. What they came up with was not the Constitution. Initially they had something called the Articles of Confederation. The idea was that they were very wary of a strong national government. As a result, they put a lot of power, probably too much power, in the hands of the states. As a result, the national government was far too weak. And this went on from 1776 till about 1789. In 1789, the Constitution came in, and the Constitution created a stronger national government. When the Constitution was being debated for ratification, there was a good deal of concern over the strength of this new national government. And so there was a decision made pretty early on that amendments needed to be added to the Constitution to protect the people from this new, powerful national government. The result that we wound up with became known as the Bill of Rights. There were initially more than 10 amendments, but only 10 amendments made it through at the time. One of those amendments is the 10th Amendment, which basically states, and I'm paraphrasing, that those powers that do not belong to the federal government nor expressly denied to the states belong to the states respectively or to the people. Now, let's fast forward a bit. For many years, the federal government was actually quite small. It controlled a number of things, certainly much more than it did under the Articles of Confederation, but it wasn't nearly the size that it is today, and I'm saying this in 2012. That changed when a guy came to power by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, came to power, it was during a very difficult time economically. FDR said that we needed to have a stronger federal government to protect the people. And when he had control of Congress through his party, when he started passing legislation, it was being struck down left and right by the justices of the United States Supreme Court. And the reason that it was getting struck down left and right is the justices said, hey, you can't do this. The 10th Amendment won't allow you to take these new powers that you're asking for. FDR saw that the Supreme Court was his biggest challenge. So what he said was, let's have a discussion on this. But it was a very one-sided discussion. What he said to the Supreme Court was, you might have final say, but Congress gets to decide how many justices sit on the Supreme Court. Accordingly, since I control the House and the Senate, we are telling you, you are going to change your mind about the strength of the 10th Amendment. Otherwise, you're going to wake up tomorrow and we're going to flood the Supreme Court with justices because they can decide how many justices sit on the Supreme Court. For example, there doesn't have to be 9 justices. There could be 20, there could be 50. So the Supreme Court realized that FDR held a lot of power, and they completely backed down. They changed their mind about things, and the next case to come along was a case called U.S. v. Darby. I believe it was in 1941 that the decision came down. And in U.S. v. Darby, the Supreme Court changed their minds about the power of the 10th Amendment. And what they said was that the 10th Amendment is now just a truism. In other words, it's just meant to be a rough guideline. We're not really going to take it too literally. And as a result, the federal government grew in power under FDR, continued to grow for many years, and is now growing more and more and more, so that the areas that belong to the states are now less and less and less. For example, K-12 education. Look through the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government has the power to regulate K-12 education. There's just nothing about it at all. And yet K-12 education has historically been the realm of the states. But now we have rules passed by Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. Congress, coming from Presidents Obama and Bush, and even some of the presidents before that. We've now got federal rules that are regulating the nature of the tests that our kids are taking, the nature of funding that are now flooding the schools. It even regulates cheeseburgers and grilled cheese sandwiches. I kid you not, but that's actually a result of the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010. It regulates how many calories kids can have for lunch. Well, that might work out great if you're just a plain normal kid. The problem is that no one-size-fits-all approach for kids and calories. We've got farmhands, we have athletes, we have kids that are still hitting their growth spurt, and to tell those kids how many calories they can have for lunch doesn't really work out so well. I'm not fighting for the grilled cheese sandwich. I'm not running for office to protect the cheeseburger. I'll let the cheeseburger take care of itself. But I am pointing out that the federal government has grown and grown and grown. And at some point in time, we have to take a stand and say, no, this is the realm of the states. I'm willing to take that stand as it relates to K-12 education. The reason that we're dealing with so many federal rules in K-12 education is because we're taking so much federal money. The reason we're taking so much federal money is because we never resolved the outstanding issue of the school funding formula here in Ohio. We've had this problem now for quite a while. As a matter of fact, 15 years since the Supreme Court of Ohio recognized it, and that meant the problem has actually existed many years before that. I want to talk about the myth of collective enlightenment. There are many people in the education community that seem to very sincerely believe that if everybody would just come together in one place at one time and be on equal ground, then somehow we will all, as a society, become more and more enlightened as a result. That is a myth. There is no actual proof that this theory works at all. And here's the reality of the matter. The reality of the matter is children are not the same. Children vary. Budgets vary. Socioeconomic conditions across Ohio vary. There are always going to be some kids that learn faster or slower than others. There are always going to be some kids that pick up on certain topics faster than others. There are always going to be some school districts that have a little more money than others. Yeah, I see this myth pervading many people in public education. They seem to think that we need to put everyone on equal playing ground, equal with regards to funding, equal with regards to education, equal with regards to teaching. It's not going to work out. We've got to recognize the differences. I'm not saying that we can't take a close look at our education budget. I'm not saying we can't take a close look at how kids learn. Of course we need to look at those things. But when you ask yourself, will everyone always be on the same page? The answer is no. People were never always on the same page. People vary. Students vary. Ask any teacher. They will tell you certain kids learn faster than others, certain kids learn slower than others. Ask any teacher that's taught in more than one school district. Of course there are radical differences from district to district. I see it, though, within the education community. Certain people seem to think that we need to get everybody on the same page, taking just as much money for every child, teaching every child the exact same way, regardless of their abilities to learn. That's a mistake. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In Ohio, many children who are not able to learn with the rest of the pack within their class, for example, we'll just choose 4th grade elementary school. Many of those kids that can't learn are then put in the slow class, so to speak. But not all schools have the resources they need for those children. Many children are able to get an IEP. Many of those IEPs don't work as well as they should. Let me give you an example a little further to specify just a little bit more. When many of our children struggle with autism, which more and more of our Ohio children do struggle with autism, a lot of teachers have a hard time dealing with those children in light of the fact that they've got to deal with the rest of the pack first and foremost. So some of our teachers, and not all of them, I'm so thankful for all the good teachers we have out there, but there are some bad teachers, and there always will be some bad teachers. But some of the bad teachers are taking those children and putting them in what are called seclusion rooms or isolation rooms. These are rooms where children have gym mats on the floor, taped to the walls, doors are shut, where the children are just told, have a temper tantrum. Those children are left there until lunchtime, and if they haven't stopped their temper tantrum, if they can't come up to speed with the rest of the class, they're then thrown right back into the seclusion room, again and again and again. That is no way for a child who is struggling to learn to come up to speed with the rest of the class. But there's this myth that we've got to isolate those people because they're not coming into the rest of this pack mentality. This myth of collective enlightenment doesn't work. It's producing all kinds of problems in Ohio, and we've got to address it with legislation. Philip Gerth for the State Board of Education.